Alright, stick with me today. We're going to get into the weeds about the definitive, the pinnacle, the ultimate, the perfect, the best all around short action cartridge. So I know, there's no such thing as the perfect cartridge for everyone in all situations, all applications, all time. But I'm going to talk about today what I think might be the actual best all-around cartridge for the short action, bolt action platform. Something like this right here. For every scenario, all game, all ranges, all targets, all situations, with no questions asked. That means it leaves no room for error or doubt that this cartridge will absolutely do it. Okay, assuming that we can put aside preferences and biases for just a minute to talk about this, we're gonna science the crap out of this. What is a caliber that could be considered, or a cartridge that could be considered the definitive bolt action, short action cartridge of all time for every shooter, every user, in every situation, every range? So I'm not just talking about hunting applications or target application. So for the sake of hunting though, we're gonna assume that you don't think of yourself as a Navy SEAL, Delta Ranger, Ninja Raider, super sniper, okay? So we're not talking about people that are gonna try to shoot game at 1,000 yards. That's not even the context of use of anything we're gonna talk about for the hunting portion of this. We're gonna talk about reasonable hunting distances and reasonable hunting scenarios. And I'm gonna use as a metric for the hunting scenarios, for the hunting specific portion of this exercise, I'm gonna use the metric of 1,500 foot-pounds for large body game, elk plus, so African dangerous game, plains game, the whole 9 yards. Like, this is the bullet and the cartridge that you can shoot it all with, no matter what. Say up to 1,500 foot-pounds needed for effective penetration, all that good stuff. That's the metric for that. What range does that die off? And then 1,000 foot-pounds for medium game, thin skin game, and regular game. So 1,000 foot-pounds of energy in the low end, 1,500 foot-pounds of energy on the high end. Those are our hunting application parameters we're gonna use for this, all right? So none of this 1,000-yard, elk hunting garbage out there that is really not ethical hunting distances for most people. Let's get into it. So to make sure I covered all the applications of this rifle and not just being too specific to hunting or target shooting or tactical applications, here's what I broke it down into. Payload. How much can this thing deliver on target, this cartridge? Drop and drift. We're gonna do it for 1,000 yards. That's kind of a standard for target shooting, that kind of stuff. Availability and price. These are the big ones. These are big considerations when you're talking about a bolt action cartridge for everything, everywhere, everyone, all the time. It has to be available. Barrier penetration. How can you use this in tactical applications? What is gonna give you the most effective bullet and payload downrange for barrier penetration and defeating stuff like body armor and stuff like that if you need it for an actual hostile environment? Hunting, definitely going to go into the hunting application of this because I think that's the more relevant categorical use for a bolt action, short action rifle for most people, and we're talking short action specifically here, okay? So when you get into the weeds of long actions or standard action versus short action, there's a lot of cartridges to choose from. You can get really lost in the weeds, but this is short action specific. Another category for consideration is bullet selection. How many bullets are out there? What can you choose from? So we're gonna approach this both as a factory setting, like, okay, what can I get from the factory? What's available out there? And then as a hand loader. So those really need to be in two different categories when it comes to considering a cartridge for yourself and your overall platform and use and stuff like that. Because as a hand loader, you have a lot more options. But I'm gonna kind of narrow this down to factory options and bullet selection, what we can actually get. And then we'll cover on the side hand loading. The next consideration is recoil. How can you manage this as a shooter? Recoil management is important to the shooter. Some of these cartridges out there that are available, like the magnums and stuff like that, which we are going to talk about today, are a little bit much for some people, but there are some options to make them a little more manageable, even in a heavy caliber. And the last two broad categories I'm covering in this is the application of this cartridge in a shorter barrel. So not just your standard 24-inch jousting lance or 26-inch or 30-inch jousting lances, but an actual practical package that a lot of people may find themselves more inclined to carry, something along the lines of this, an 18-inch barreled short action bolt action rifle. These are extremely handy type of in size and category of use of rifle that I think can appeal to a lot of shooters out there. And given the modern trends and stuff like that, with using suppressors and stuff like that, your short barrels like this, 18 to 20 inch range, are actually becoming a lot more prevalent. A lot more people are using them today. And the last application we're gonna talk about is target shooting. What's the best caliber and cartridge for target shooting? At all ranges, PRS, whatever you wanna call it, whatever the game is, target shooting. Personally, I've narrowed it down to one cartridge that I think is the ultimate in all of these categories with all of these things considered, and that is the 300 Wisdom. However, I know there are other options out there. For the sake of fairness, I've decided to pick two of the probably more commented options based on the short video that I did and posted a while back. Two of the more common themes I was recognizing were the 7mm style Wisdom, like 7 Wisdom or 7 SAUM, which are short action Magnum cartridges shooting a 7mm bullet. So I did a category for that. And I also did the 6.5 PRC, because the 6.5 PRC is one of those cartridges out there right now that is extremely popular, is gaining a lot of traction with shooters, hunters, and target shooters and stuff like that everywhere around the world. And it's becoming pretty ubiquitous, pretty darn close to maybe not even exceeding the 300 Wisdom in a lot of ways. So let's get into the math of this and dive right into the numbers. For the sake of reality, I picked for my test metrics a bullet for each that is available in a loaded factory option. Okay, so for the 300 Wisdom we have, and you'll have to pretend because I don't have one on hand, we have the 178 grain ELDX, and we're going to look at it both in a standard barrel configuration, so 24-inch barrel, velocities, drag, drop, drift, all that good stuff, and a shorter barrel configuration, so minusing 150 foot-pounds, or sorry, feet per second of muzzle velocity, theorizing that you're using it out of an 18-inch barrel. So I broke down the numbers for that in the 300 Wisdom with the 178 grain ELDX. Then for the 7 Wisdom, I actually chose 162 grain ELDX. I can make sure, which I don't have the 162 ELDX on hand. I have a 175 ELDX, so we're going to use this as our representation of that. The 175 ELDX is a good option for the 7 Wisdom as well, but it's not out there available in factory loaded ammunition, so I couldn't break down numbers on that. From a hand loading perspective, you're gonna gain a little bit of juice there. But let's stick to factory options from the manufacturers in stuff that I could actually find online. For the 6.5 PRC, I chose the 143 ELDX because it is a comparable bullet to the other two, same manufacturer, same style of bullet, all those good things. And I calculated that for a short barrel, 18-inch, and a 24-inch barrel, standard length. So for the sake of sanity, I chose the 3 factory bullets that are actually available in loaded ammunition on the shelves, and you can find them online and that kind of thing. And I based all of my numbers and stuff off of box posted velocity. So what is a box that you can get, which we know Hornady pads their numbers a little bit, so I calculated it slightly less than box posted velocity. And then for my shorter barrel variant, I calculated it minus 150 feet per second each of the rounds. All right, for the 300 Wisdom, drop and drift and energy at 1,000 yards, you're looking at 8.35 mils of drop. With a 10-mile-an-hour wind, you're looking at about 2.05 of drift, with 930 foot-pounds of energy at 1,000 yards, and that is in the short barrel configuration, so the 18-inch barrel going 2,800 feet per second. When you go to a standard configuration, a 24-inch barrel going 2,950 feet per second, you're looking at a drop of 7.39 and a drift of 1.88. So I'm gonna calculate everything with a 10-mile-an-hour crosswind, direct left to right or right to left, whatever, and I'm calculating for today my density altitude, lower temperatures around about the high 30s, low 40s, density altitude of about 5,000. So foot-pounds of energy with that standard length barrel, 1,069 foot-pounds of energy, more than enough to take a deer at 1,000 yards. So let me back up. For the 2,800 feet per second, the slower velocity, so the short barreled variant of the 300 Wisdom, it goes subsonic around about 1,400 yards. Your 1,500 foot-pound threshold of ethical take of game, a large body game, big stuff, big animals, elk plus, African Plains game, buffalo, whatever you want to call it, you're looking at about 675 yards for an ethical range to take that just based on the math of foot-pounds. For deer, anything else, 950 yards. Moving up to the 2,950 foot per second, so your standard length barrel, you're looking at subsonic about 1,500 yards, not bad. You're looking at an elk plus game ethical distance for 1,500 foot-pounds, about 775 yards, and deer at about 1,050 yards. That's not too shabby, and that's just with the 178 grain ELDX. And if you bump those numbers up, or bump the bullet up to like a 208 grain weight, or 200 grain weight, or 212, something like that, you can get a lot more out of this thing, a lot further away. It's got serious energy on it. All right, let's talk about the 7 Wisdom. In our short barrel configuration, going 2,850 foot per second, drop and drift at 1,000 yards, 7.4 mils of drop, 1.72 mils of drift, and 1,039 foot-pounds. So you're beating out that 300 Wisdom in the short barrel by just a little bit. That's with the standard 162 ELDX that is factory loaded, and you can get those on the shelf. Now, if you compare it to something heavier in the Wisdom's probably gonna beat it, but you can also try to put a little more in the 7mm, say a short action Magnum or Wisdom with hand loading. We'll get into that later. It goes subsonic about 1,650 yards, which is a considerable amount flatter and further than the 300 Wisdom. You're looking at a ethical elk take range of 675 yards, almost identical to the Wisdom, and deer at about 1,025 yards, so you get a little bit more from the Wisdom, 300. All right, with the full length barrel, the standard length barrel going 3,000 feet per second, and this is based off of box posted velocity, 6.64 mils of drop at 1,000 yards and 1.5 mil drift. That's pretty awesome. 1,184 foot-pounds. We've already got the Wisdom beaten. And subsonic, you're looking at about 1,750 to 1,760 yards, so it doesn't actually go subsonic until a mile. That's phenomenal. Elk or bigger, you can take them ethically from an energy standpoint, 775 yards, and deer, 1,125 yards. I'm not saying those are ethical distances to hunt, I'm just saying the bullet's capable of penetration, theoretically. Let's move down to the small guy in the group, the 6.5 PRC in the short barrel variant, going 2,800 feet per second. Drop at 1,000 yards is 8 mils, drift is 1.89 mils, so you're pretty comparable to the 300 Wisdom in the shorter barrel configuration, maybe beating it out just a little bit. Foot-pounds is 800 foot-pounds difference, so you're looking at a difference of about 100 foot-pounds, a little bit less. It goes subsonic about 1,500, so it's flying a little bit flatter and a little bit further than the 300 Wisdom. Elk, 475 yards. You lose a lot of yardage and a lot of range with that 6.5 PRC in that little tiny bullet. You lose a lot of ethical hunting distance. Deer, 825 yards. Now let's look at it at 2,950 feet per second out of the standard size barrel. You're looking at a drop of 7.1 mils and a drift of 1.75 mils and 924 foot-pounds of energy at 1,000 yards. So you're beating the 300 Wisdom in trajectory alone, in speed, and all those good things. Subsonic, it goes subsonic about 1,600 yards, so you're still cooking pretty good out there for a good long range. Elk, 575 yards though, so you've still only gained about 100 yards of useful hunting range for large-bodied game out of this cartridge. For deer, 925 yards. So that overall, let's just break it down. That does tell us a few things. One, yes, the 6.5 PRC shoots flatter. The 7 Wisdom shoots further flatter, but the 300 Wisdom delivers more when it gets there at closer and more nominal and regular ranges, except for the 7 Wisdom. And this is the dark horse in this whole equation. And this is why I keep going back and forth on this, because when I look at the numbers of it, everything about the 7 Wisdom is a winner in all categories, in all ranges, in all situations of what we talked about so far for both short barrel and long barrel. The 7 Wisdom, the 7mm bullet just beats it all. There's one big problem with the 7 Wisdom. It's a reloader's cartridge. It's not a factory cartridge. There's almost nothing on the shelves for it. It's almost no availability, and there's almost no rifles on the shelves for it. People chambering rifles in that. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, because it's a fantastic option, and I think it's probably, if I had to pick one just based on the pure numbers, you're looking at the 7 Wisdom going, yeah, that's the one. But the problem with it is availability. All right, so let's get into the next category where I broke it down into payload, drop, drift, availability, price, target, barrier penetration, all this good stuff. I set up a point system so that I could rank these things overall in points and who beats who and what. Because I had in mind at the beginning of all this that the 300 Wisdom was the ultimate cartridge overall and the best one anyone should choose, and I kind of still lean that way, but we'll get to the reasons at the end. Let's get into this breakdown for the point system. Payload, let's just talk about payload. How big a bullet can you get on target downrange? No question about it, the 300 Wisdom being capable of up to 220 grain bullets, it's got 3 points for that one. Coming in second place, the 7 with 2 points, and 6.5 PRC with 1 point. It's got the smallest bullets out of the bunch. So I ranked them 3, 2, 1, which, you know, best being 3 points, middle 2 points, worst 1 point. Drop and drift. This one is where the 7 Wisdom wins at 3 points. The 6.5 and the 300 are pretty darn close when it comes to drop and drift, but I went ahead and gave the points to the 6.5 because it does shoot a little bit flatter, a little bit further than the 300 Wisdom with the bullet factory options that I've chosen. Now, we can pad this up all we want with hand loading information, selecting different bullets and really like getting something juicy out of the 300 Wisdom in a burger hybrid target or something like that. It's going to beat the snot out of the 7 or the 6.5 PRC because there's just so limited of bullet options for the 6.5 PRC. There's only so big you can go, up to the 156 grain Burger Elite Hunters and stuff like that, or Extreme Outer Limits Hunter. That's a great bullet, but it's hard to make go fast in the 6.5 PRC, and when you put something comparable to it in the 300 Wisdom, the Wisdom's gonna win. So for the sake of this portion of the exercise, drop and drift, based on the factory stuff, the 6.5 PRC beats the Wisdom in drop and drift. Availability and price. This is where everything comes to a head. For me, this is one of the biggest categories in considering for the average shooter, the average user, and the average person out there, which cartridge to choose. Because you need a cartridge that's available and you can afford to shoot. Pure availability, the 300 Wisdom. There are so many options out there. I look on these websites and stuff like that. There's up to 30 options of 300 Wisdom. I think I wrote down factory 300 Wisdom, up to 35 offerings in factory 300 Wisdom. So that's pretty awesome. 3 points for 300 Wisdom there. The 6.5 PRC is number 2 though, and it's a very close number 2. There was about 28 factory offerings out there roughly that I could find for the 6.5 PRC. 2 points for the 6.5 PRC. And the last, dragging up the rear, is the 7 Wisdoms, 7 Psalms, all of those things, 7 Ultra Mags, all that stuff. 1 point, barely. There are maybe 4 to 5 offerings of that kind of stuff and almost none on the shelves locally. I'm talking online, you can find a few, 4 to 5 offerings. Locally, almost nothing. All right, barrier penetration. This is where the metal hits the meat right here. This is a tactical application type of thing. What can do the most damage downrange? A 220 grain or a 200 grain 30 caliber projectile is very, very hard to beat when it comes to barrier penetration and just whomp on target, you know what I mean? So I gave 3 points there for barrier penetration and all those good things for the 300. The 7 bringing up a close second because it's pretty darn spicy when it comes to hitting barriers and stuff like that with 2 points, and the 6.5 1 point. It's diminutive in comparison to the other 2. It's almost half the size. Hunting applications. What gives you the broadest range of hunting use scenarios with the 300 Wisdom? And I'm talking load it up, load it down from 110 grain all the way up to, what did I write down here? 220 grain bullets, hunting applications. There is nothing you can't hunt with the 300 Wisdom. Nothing. There's nothing on the planet you cannot hunt with the 300 Wisdom effectively at any ethical range. 3 points for the 300 Wisdom. Bringing up second place with that, just because of the math of it, the size and the bullet options and all that good stuff, and the bullet ranges from, you know, 140s or 30s or 110s, 80s even maybe down to, what do we got here? Yeah, there was a lot of bullet range for the 7mm as well. Not quite as much as the 300, but it's pretty close. You can get a bullet for every application. 2 points for the 7mm in the hunting category. And last, 1 point for the 6.5 PRC. I'm not saying you can't hunt big game with 6.5 PRC. You can take elk with them. You can take all those wonderful things. The right bullet in the right place does the job. Your bullet selections are just going to be narrower, and the smaller bullets, barrier penetration, or not really barrier penetration, but say hide penetration, bone penetration, and stuff like that. You're going to need to use a very, very specific bullet in that 6.5 PRC to get through some of those really thick-bodied game, even African, you know, plains game and, you know, dangerous game and stuff like that. A bear, like Kodiaks and stuff, I would not take a 6.5 PRC hunting Kodiaks unless I had to. I'd choose a 300 every time. All right, leads us into the next category, bullet selection. The 300 Wisdom beats it all handily, 3 points, no questions at it. There's more 30 caliber bullets out there for applications and in general than anything else that I've seen. 7mm close to that, so that's a 2 pointer, and the 6.5 is down pretty comparable to the 7mm insofar as the breadth of bullets you can get, but the grain weight sizes and the differences in that are just not as broad. So the 6.5 PRC brings up the rear again with 1 point. All right, recoil. This is also another important aspect to hunting, shooting, target application, all those things, just shooter comfort when you're, using a rifle system. I will say this, you can nullify a lot of the recoil issues for these larger calibers, these magnums in short actions with muzzle brakes and suppressors and stuff like that. They do actually tame a lot of this down. But the loser in the recoil category, because it does recoil the most, 300 Wisdom with 1 point. Seconded by the 7mm with 2 points, and by far the most sweetheart shooter of the group is the 6.5 PRC with 3 points. All right, short barrel applications. Based on the math and the numbers I did, and I did do a cross section of a few different bullets in these, and just kind of testing out velocities and stuff like that as I'm working up, load data or whatever. And so I've got a cross section of different bullets. For this exercise, I'm just using the factory available stuff. For the short barrel application, so a shorter, lighter package, short action, the 300 was 1 point. Came in with 1 point because it's a little bit slower, a little bit, more drop and drift and all those things. The winner of this category was actually the 7mm. So the 7mm in a shorter barrel works better. Goes further, flatter, faster, and longer. And 2 points for the 6.5 because it beats the 300 Wisdom. It's a little flatter shooting, definitely. And the last category I want to talk about is target shooting. If you had to pick one of these calibers or these cartridges for target shooting in the short action platform, whether you're using long barrel, short barrel, doesn't matter. I think the friendliest version for most shooters, the friendliest cartridge to actually use would be the 6.5 PRC. So we gave that bad boy 3 points. The second most friendly, I see a lot of competitions, F-class and stuff like that. A lot of guys using the 7mm and really heavy rifles and stuff like that. So we gave that number 2. And the last one in the group would be the 300 Wisdom because it's just not the easiest to stay on target with or to get your follow-up shots and all those things out at distance. You could do it. You load it down with a light bullet, a little bit lighter recoil. You could definitely take it to the target range and do some really fantastic stuff, be really competitive with targets. I think in 2018, the world record smallest group at 1,000 yards was actually shot with a 300 Wisdom. So there's something to consider there. But for the purpose of our exercise, I gave it 1 point. It was down at the bottom of the list so far as recoil management and all those good things. Drag, drop, drift, all that. Considering all for target shooting at long range. All right, so where did we end up with our totals? Here's where we ended up with the totals. And the totals don't actually tell the whole story for me. 18 points for the 300 Wisdom, 19 points for the 7mm Wisdom, the obvious winner in points there, and 16 points for the 6.5 PRC. So from the point system alone, the 7mm wins, but only just and only barely. So let's sum it up though. Taking in mind all of these factors, all these considerations, and the minutia of some of the math is very close with most of these cartridges and the bullets we selected. They're very, very close to one another in drag, drop, drift, and muzzle energy and all that stuff downrange. You have to consider the whole package. What's available? What's got the broadest range of use? What can take the most and do the most damage to the most amount of types of targets in most ranges? At any range you would hunt ethically. The clear winner for me is, I don't know. All right, if I just had to pick based on availability, what's out there, off the shelf type of stuff, I could build this rifle, take this rifle anywhere in the world and hunt anything I wanted to hunt with it at any ethical range, and I could find ammo for the daggum thing, I would take the 300 Wisdom. That's just my choice. I would take the 300 Wisdom. It has a lot of benefits in tactical applications. It has a lot of benefits in barrier penetration, extremely large game, definitely dangerous game, that kind of stuff. Lots of benefit there. I've seen, my dad's been shooting it for years. He's been shooting this 300 Wisdom for probably 15 years now. It's been his primary cartridge for everything. He's taken buffalo with it, elk with it, you name it. If you're going after bear, Kodiak, that kind of thing, I'm bringing a 300. I'm gonna put the biggest whomping thomping bullet I can take in that thing, like a 200 grain, 220 grain, 225 if I can get it. And I'm gonna put down as much absolute metal as I can on target in any range that I'm coming after something like that. So overall for me, it's the 300 Wisdom. I think that it makes the most sense mathematically, economically, And just from a shootability standpoint, it's really easy to reload. You can load it down for say you have a smaller statured shooter and recoil is an issue, put a muzzle brake on it and a suppressor on that thing and load it down to like 140 grain or 130 grain with a little bit of a light powder load and stuff like that. More than ethical enough for taking deer and small game and stuff like that. Even varmints, you can varmint shoot with 110 grain thing out of this thing, and you're gonna be whipping those suckers really, really fast, 3,400 feet per second or something crazy like that. So you could actually varmint shoot with the thing, blowing prairie dogs to snot with it. If you're looking at, you know, stuff like coyotes and stuff, if you're fur hunting, I probably would not bring a 30 caliber. I'd be down in the 22s or the 6mm or something like that, but that's kind of a different category, very specific use category. You could fur hunt with a 30 cal. You're just gonna have to be selective with your bullets and your placement and stuff like that. Make sure you pick a bullet that doesn't tear up the meat too bad, but gets there fast and does the job and that kind of thing. So you load it down to those lower weight bullets, moving really fast, maybe less explosive type of bullets, more like full metal jacket type of things. Be surgical with your shots and you can save your fur. That's it for me. I think the 300 Wisdom probably checks most of the boxes and is the most well-rounded, and it's just available. It's everywhere. It doesn't kick too bad. My dad's got a really lightweight Winchester Model 70 and he shoots 300 Wisdom, and it's really not that bad. I mean, it doesn't have a muzzle brake on or a suppressor or anything like that, so it does thump a little bit more in your 308s and 7mm08s and all the, you know, standard short action cartridges that are non-magnums. You would think that those would be probably one of the better options for this type of thing, and I agree that they can be better options. So the short action cartridges that are not magnums, say your 308 class, 6.5 class, your 7mm08 class, yeah, there are better options. And for a lot of shooters in a lot of scenarios, they are going to be easier to shoot and way more available than something like, I mean, the 300 Wisdom's pretty available, but the 308 is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. You could almost say the 308 is the perfect short action cartridge, or the 6.5 Creedmoor, or the 7mm08. But again, you have to look at this from a practical consideration of all game, all ranges, all world availability. What can you do everything with? The only thing that really fits that bill in a practical sense is the 300 Wisdom for me. The 7mm or a 7mm short action Magnum cartridge, if anyone ever standardized one that actually caught on and stayed in the industry, would be even better option. But it just doesn't exist out there. The 7 Psalms, the 7 Ultra Mag, short action Ultra Mag, the 7 Wisdom, they just didn't stick around, and they have not become as popular as I think they probably should have been when you give all considerations to drag, drop, drift, and bullet velocities and coefficients, ballistic coefficients and muzzle energy and all these wonderful things that we love to math and nerd out about. The 7mm beats it all when you can get it, when you can find it, when you can shoot it. Now, if you're a reloader, let's just put that aside. Secondary category, say you're a reloader and you're gonna reload anyway, it doesn't matter, you can pick and choose whatever you want, then the 7 Wisdom is the clear winner of all these things. Even the 6.5 PRC loaded hot with the 156 grain, you know, extreme outer limit bullet from Berger, which is one of the only ones available that's of any kind of ballistic coefficient comparison to your average 7mm, even the average weight range 7mm from 160s to 175s. That 156 is the only thing that comes close to those, and you still, it's not, you know, you can't, it still doesn't get there. It doesn't get as to where the 7 Wisdom does so far. It's just distance and reach and holding velocity and holding muzzle energy at those distances, okay? So it may be a little flatter shooter in some circumstances. The 6.5 PRC might be a little bit less drag and drift at some ranges, but when you just keep going, extreme long ranges, extended long ranges, the 7mm just keep cruising. So if you're a reloader and that's where you're looking from, that perspective, reloading only, don't worry about what's on the shelf, you don't really care, 7 Wisdom is the obvious winner, or 7 Psalm, something along those lines for the short action, bolt action. I know that was a lot, that's a lot of information today, but that, you know, that short that I put out the other day about what the perfect, you know, cartridge was for the short action, the, you know, the definitive short action cartridge, you know, had a lot of conversation about it, a lot of people talking, a lot of opinions and stuff out there. This is just my opinion. There's going to be somebody out there that has a completely different opinion, but for me, it's going to be the 300 Wisdom if I got to buy ammo. It's going to be the 7mm Wisdom if I'm reloading, because I love them both. You know, I love them both. I love what they both offer. All right, that's it for me today. Thank y'all for joining me again. Remember to keep your knives sharp and your powder dry, and y'all be blessed.